You're watching part of our series on building garage storage racks. The racks are perfect for beginners, cheap to build, and are an excellent storage solution. In this episode, we will be building the 5 wide by 4 tall storage rack. The video is split into 2 parts. First, the Home Depot version tailored for their 27-gallon HDX black and yellow totes. Second, a modified design to fit the 27-gallon black and yellow totes from Costco, Lowe's, and Sam's Club. After nearly a year of full-time work, I am excited to introduce SnapSort AI. It's a system designed to help you manage the items in your totes. It's an organization app where AI does all the boring parts for you. Slap a sticker on your tote, scan it once. Now it's in the app, ready for your items. Snap a photo of your item. AI reviews the shot and writes out the description terms automatically. No typing necessary, making searching for your items later easy. Months later, search for boxing gloves. The app points you right to the tote. No more digging. You are in control of borrowing, moving, or deleting items. Invite your family to your workspace and organize together. Free to try on iOS and Android. Link below. This part of the video is for the 5 wide by 4 tall tote rack. This rack is specifically designed for the Home Depot 27-gallon HDX totes. The dimensions of the rack will be 110 and 9/16 of an inch long. The rack is 28 and a quarter inches deep, and it's 67 and 11/16 inches tall. The first step will be to gather your supplies. You're going to need a combination of 22 2x4s that are 8 feet long and then 4 2x4s that are 10 foot long. Do not use the 10-foot long boards yet. That will be towards the end of the project. The first cut that you're going to make will be for 40 identical shelf supports. These need to be cut at 28 and a quarter inch long. And if you notice here on the edges, I do cut the shelf supports at 45 degrees for 2 reasons. One, easier sliding. The angle guides the tote into the rack. And then 2 is tote protection. It prevents the tote flaps from catching on the otherwise sharp 90-degree angles. So how do you make this cut? Very easy. Take your 28 and a quarter inch long 2x4 and then about halfway through the 2x4, 3/4 of an inch, go ahead and cut off this blue part at 45 degrees. And then do the same thing on the other end as well. The next step will be to create these ladder structures. So we have our shelf supports from the previous step here. And we are now introducing a new 2x4 represented in the green here, which is 64 and 11/16 of an inch long. So the first shelf support needs to be 11 inches from the edge here. The next one is 12.5 inches away from this shelf support, 12.5 inches here, 12.5 inches here. And you should be left over with 2 3/16 of an inch on the end there. So to connect these components together, you will need to use 2.5 inch long screws. Do not use longer screws so that they don't poke through to the other end. I highly recommend that you pre-drill the holes and countersink these screws to prevent the wood from splitting, and also use wood glue for additional strength. So you will need a total of 6 of these single-sided ladder structures, all identical. Now, some of these are going to go through a slight modification. The modification is you're going to add another layer of shelf supports, and they're going to be aligned with the previous layer that you had here before. So the spacing will be the same. 11 inches from the edge for the first shelf support there, 12.5 inches for the next one, 12.5 inches here, 12.5 inches, and then again you're left with 2 3/16 of an inch on the edge there. So you will use 2.5 inch long screws to attach these shelf supports and pre-drill, countersink, and use wood glue. So in the end, you should have 4 double-sided ladder structures and then 2 single-sided ladder structures. The next step is going to be to integrate everything together. So we are introducing a new 2x4 here. It's represented in the blue. This is where the 10-foot long 2x4 comes into play. It is 110 and 9/16 of an inch long, and these are identical. You're going to be adding the single-sided ladder structure to the blue component here. It needs to be facing inward, and you will use 3.5-inch long screws. And I definitely recommend that you pre-drill, countersink, and use wood glue here to make sure that it's strong. And then go ahead and add the second single-sided ladder structure, also facing inward. 3.5-inch screws, pre-drill, countersink, and use wood glue. So for the middle of the rack, we're going to be adding the double-sided ladder structures. So the spacing here is important. So from the edge of this 2x4 to the edge of this 2x4, it's 20 and 5/16 of an inch long. So you're going to be attaching this double-sided ladder structure using 3.5-inch screws, pre-drill, countersink, and use wood glue. Go ahead and add the second double-sided ladder structure. Again, the spacing is exactly the same, 20 and 5/16 of an inch here. Add the next one, 20 and 5/16 of an inch here. And you can use a spacer to make sure that these are all identical. So in the end, everything should align nicely. 20 and 5/16 inch should remain here as well. All right, the next step will be to add 2 more of these blue components. So these are going to be the 110 and 9/16 inch long 2x4s, the 2 remaining 10-foot long lumber pieces. Go ahead and add these with 3.5-inch long screws, pre-drill, countersink, and use wood glue. At this point, your rack is almost complete. You need to make sure that it does not sway side to side. So to do that, you can add these L-shaped brackets, and then I'm going to link the ones that I purchased for my project in the garage, and I'll explain why. These need to be added both to the top and to the bottom, and they're added to the corners here to strengthen the rack. So I used the bracket here from Amazon. And the bracket has holes that are pre-drilled more in the center of the bracket versus on the sides. And this makes for a stronger connection. So I added 3 screws and secured that all around. All right, so this step is very important. You do need to brace your rack to the actual garage studs, just in case, somebody climbs it, or if you kind of load it up in an uneven way, for example, it can topple. So you definitely need to secure it. In this case, you can use these simple kind of L-shaped brackets for this. You can buy them at Home Depot, Lowe's, and many other places sell them. So if I remove the drywall here for a second, you'll see that they need to align with the actual garage studs. And you can use 3.5-inch long screws to secure them to the studs, or 4-inch long screws. The idea is so that it's set in place and will not move. And then connect them to the actual rack with 1-inch long screws. This part of the video is for the 5 wide by 4 tall storage rack. This rack is specifically designed for the 27-gallon totes from Costco, Lowe's, and Sam's Club. The overall dimensions of the rack will be 114 inches long. The rack is 30 1/4 inches deep, and it is 65 and 7/16 of an inch tall. The first step will be to gather your supplies. You're going to need a combination of 22 2x4s that are 8 feet long, and then 4 2x4s that are going to be 10 foot long. Do not use up the 10-foot long boards yet. That will be towards the end of the project. The first cut that you're going to need to make is these 40 identical shelf supports. These are 2x4s that are going to be cut to 30 1/4 inches long. Now, if you look carefully, you'll see that I cut the shelf support edges at 45 degrees. I do this for 2 reasons. One is easier sliding. The angle guides the totes into the rack. And 2 is for tote protection. It prevents the tote flaps from catching on the otherwise sharp 90-degree edges. So how do you make this cut? Very easy. Take your 30 1/4 inch 2x4, and then about halfway through the 2x4, 3/4 of an inch, cut off this blue part at 45 degrees. And then do the same thing on the other side as well. The next step will be to create these ladder structures. So we have our shelf supports from the previous step here, and we are introducing a new 2x4. It's 62 and 7/16 of an inch long, represented in the green here. So we're going to be integrating these together, and the distance from the shelf support to the edge of this green 2x4 is 10 and 7/16 of an inch. The next shelf support needs to be 11 and 15/16 of an inch away from the edge of this 2x4. And then same here, same here. And you should be left with 2 and 3/16 of an inch at the end here. So go ahead and secure all of those together with 2.5 inch screws. I definitely recommend that you pre-drill the holes and countersink the screws to prevent the wood from splitting. I also recommend that you add wood glue for additional strength. You're going to need a total of 6 of these single-sided ladder structures. Now, some of these ladder structures will undergo a slight modification. The modification is you're going to add a new layer of shelf supports. These are going to be at the same place as your previous layer there. So the distance will be 10 and 7/16 inches away from the edge, just like the other ones. And then 11 and 15/16 inches here, same here, same here. And then you should be left with 2 and 3/16 of an inch from the edge there. So go ahead and use 2.5 inch screws to secure the shelf supports and all the components together. Pre-drill, countersink, and use wood glue. So you're going to need a total of 4 of these double-sided ladder structures and 2 single-sided ladder structures. The next step is to integrate everything together. So we're introducing a new 2x4 here. It's 114 inches long, and these are identical. You're going to use the 10-foot lumber to cut your first 2 here. So you will need to incorporate the single-sided ladder structure. It needs to face inward, and you're going to connect it using 3.5 inch screws. Now for this joint, I definitely recommend that you pre-drill the holes, countersink the screws, and add wood glue. Go ahead and add the second single-sided shelf support on the edge here using the same technique. 3.5 inch screws, pre-drill, countersink, and use wood glue. Make sure that the ladder structure is facing inward. All right, now for the inside of the rack, we're going to be adding the double-sided ladder structures. These are going to be 21 inches apart. So from the edge of this 2x4 to the edge of this 2x4, it is 21 inches. Use 3.5 inch long screws, pre-drill, countersink, and use wood glue. Go ahead and add the next one. So it's again at 21 inches. And then you're just going to keep doing that until you've integrated all of the shelf supports. So they should all be 21 inches apart. You can use a spacer to make sure that they're all nice and even. All right, next we're going to be adding 2 more of these blue components. So these are 2x4s that are 114 inches long. These will be the last 2 remaining 10-foot long boards that you should have. And go ahead and add these with 3.5 inch long screws, pre-drill, countersink, and use wood glue. At this point, your rack is almost complete. So you're going to need to add these L-shaped brackets. These prevent the rack from swaying side to side. And I'm going to link the ones that I purchased so that you can purchase those as well if you would like. And I'll explain why. So these are going to be added to the edges here, both from the bottom and from the top. And we're putting them on the corners here to prevent the rack from swaying side to side. The reason why I like the ones that I purchased is because the holes are pre-drilled more towards the center of the rack, of the bracket rather, than on the edges. And this makes a stronger joint. So I added 3 screws and secured all of those together. All right, the last part is very important here. When you do have your rack and it's in the garage, it's very important that you brace the rack to the actual studs of the garage and not the drywall. So if we remove the drywall here for a second, you will see that the L-shaped brackets here that I'm using, they are going to connect directly to the studs of the garage. And you can use 1-inch screws to connect the brackets to the actual frame of the rack, and then 3.5 inch long screws or 4-inch long screws to secure them directly to the studs of the garage. Use a stud finder or YouTube and see. There's many different techniques for finding those studs. Hey, thanks for watching. If you wanted a printable PDF build guide, I will have it linked below. You can print it or download it to your phone and use it offline in the garage. It will have everything you need to be successful in building a rack. See you next time.